Welcome again, everyone. This is the third of the 4 sessions for awareness of the new CMC standards for IMC representatives and for the QAC assessors. We've had 2 very successful sessions so far and have quite a lot of notes to follow up on. These sessions are only the beginning of the process of ensuring that all of our IMCs and all of the assessors are up to speed with the changes, the new standards, competence framework, the code of conduct and so on. Like I say, only the start, because we will be following up by posting the recordings of all 4 sessions to be available to people afterwards, and also we'll be publishing the slide deck that we're using during these webinars as well. So all of that material is going to be available to everybody afterwards. And also both Jalal and myself and the QAC and PSC committees are ready to provide one-to-one help with any IMC or assessor that would like some help and advice and assistance following on. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'll lead the first part of our presentation today and then hand over to Jalal, who will talk in more detail about the changes to the standards. I'm going to offer the opportunity for questions when we get to the end of some of the slides where there's particular information being shown. So we are happy to take questions and comments as we go along through the presentation. And also, if you want to just sort of pose a question or raise a comment, but don't want to interrupt the presentation, you can put your comment or question in the chat box, because we'll be following that, and we'll be picking up any comments or questions as we go along. So to start sharing, okay. So this morning we're going to cover four areas. First of all, an overview of the scheme and the standards, just to make sure everybody's fully aware of what they are, where they are, and how to find them and look at them. Then just a very brief coverage of the process that we followed in the updating to show the robustness of that process. And then a couple of slides about how to prepare for triennial assessments now with the new standards for IMCs and for QAC assessors. And then Jalal will go on in detail to look at the changes and what effect they'll have. And one of the things we want to mention up front is that we've invited IMC representatives and QAC assessors together to these webinars, because we want to make sure that there's full transparency for everybody who's involved in the process. So having both sort of groups of people here, hopefully you all get the same information, you all get the same understanding. The questions and the comments that are made can be understood by everybody. So moving on, the CMC standards comprise, first of all, a manual, which is really the guidebook for IMCs themselves, because it contains all the necessary guidance and rules and regulations for IMCs in terms of how they're governed, how they're managed, their structure, their committee structure, how they deal with the CMC standards, the competence framework, the code of conduct, and so on, and how they manage the assessment process for CMC candidates. And that also contains information about the two main principles of ICMCI, which is equivalence and reciprocity. The principle of equivalence in that there is flexibility in how an institute may frame its competence framework, its code of conduct, and so on, which covers those items you now see on the screen. And also mentioned is the guideline to compliance with ISO 17024, which is the international standard for the certification of persons. And when an institute certifies, ICMCI certifies a CMC, then they are in fact certifying a person. And so this standard 17024 is applicable. And the CMC manual has been written in such a way that it covers all of the requirements of ISO 17024, which means that an institute could actually be accredited by ICMCI in order to certify CMCs and claim that they are accredited to follow 17024 standard. ICMCI is a self-appointed accreditation body for using ISO 17011, the accreditation standard. And so we are able to accredit individual institutes against the standard 17024, and CMC manual, if an institute follows it exactly, then they are ready to be accredited against 17024. Now, apart from the manual, there are some appendices, some of which are standard documents where they have to be followed. And those are the CMC competence framework, the matrix of preferred and accessible assessment techniques. That is a table showing CMC assessment approaches, techniques, models, which ICMCI insists that an institute should use in assessing CMC candidates. Then there is the code of conduct, which has now been updated and expanded in its scope. The common body of knowledge, which is, if you like, the list of areas of knowledge that one would expect a consultant to have. So this is a guideline for the sort of maybe the training or the availability of resources that an institute should make available or signpost consultants to in order to fulfill their CMC competence requirements. And then the last document, which is a standard, is the additional prerequisites. And this is the one that shows the educational, the length of experience of actually active consultancy operations and so on. So those 5 documents are appendices, which are additional standards to be followed. And then there is a set of guidance documents which provide background information to the standards. A background of the CMC competence framework, giving a sort of detail of the principles behind it. The framework overview, which is a 1-page description of the framework, and then an introduction presentation, a PowerPoint presentation that can be used as part of the introduction to CMC for candidates or whoever. There is a glossary of terms, which we will be expanding as we go along. It's not got many items in it at the moment, but it will be, a complete definition of all of the terms that we use within the CMC standards. There's a guidance document on the general requirements of ISO 17024, which institutes can use maybe if they're going for accreditation to understand more detail about what they would need to have in place. There is a guidance document on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is one of the key components of our updated code of conduct, and also a document of anti-bribery guidance, which is another key component of our updated code of conduct as well. So those documents are all there together with the standards documents as sort of background information for IMCs. Now I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and let Kuzema show you where all these documents can be found on the ICMCI website.
Hello, everyone. Let me go to our website, cmc-global.org, where you can go to MC designation, and under that menu, you go to CMC. In this page, you go through this page and down, you can review the download copies of the updated documentation for the competency framework, for all the documentation that Nick already briefed you about it.
Okay, so any questions so far on what we've talked about? Okay, not seeing anything so far. So if I can start sharing again, Kazema, and now everything's moved, so I can't actually, there we go, share. Okay.
Just make it full screen. Yes, it's working.
Okay, good. So, okay, so that's an overview of the of what the CMC standards are within the scheme. Now, the process that we followed in doing the updating, first of all, we took the existing standards, all of the existing documents as a basis, and we did that because we felt that there was actually nothing wrong with them at all. They were good documents, but just needed updating in order to take into account changes that had happened over the past 7 or 8 years since they were published back in 2014. We then carried out some research work, firstly to identify what clients were looking for from a consultant. When they engaged a consultant, what were the key things that they wanted from a consultant? What were the competencies they wanted a consultant to show? So we carried out a voice of the customer project, carried out a client survey, and got some feedback, which we built into the drafting of the updated standards. We also looked at other standards and frameworks and codes of conduct from similar organizations to ourselves, and seen whether there was something in there that we could find useful within our updates. We also looked at changes that had taken place in areas such as technology. Technology had moved on a lot in the last 8 or 9 years. Changes in management practice, and also changes in societal values. So we took all of that research and then produced some updated drafts based on the outcomes we found. They were then reviewed by the professional standards committee members, and further drafts were produced, which were then submitted to some IMCs for comment, so that we could sort of get feedback from those people who are going to be using these documents. Then from that, we were able to produce final versions, which were submitted to the board for approval last year and were published at the annual meeting in October, with a 1-year transition period allowed, so that from October this year, 2022, those new standards will be fully enforced, and assessments of institutes will be carried out against those standards from October this year. So that was the process we followed. Now, turning to preparing for assessments from now on. For an IMC, I mean, one of the first things an IMC should do when preparing for its next assessment, if it's a triennial assessment, that means like a follow-on assessment, not a first full assessment. If they've had a previous assessment, then they should be reviewing the report from that assessment and seeing what rectifications, recommendations, or suggestions had been made, and obviously making sure that any required actions have been put in place, and evidence can be shown that action's been taken. So that's sort of making sure that what was found before has been sorted out. Then read the new CMC manual, and especially the bullet points that you see on the screen there, because they are the ones which are to do with the sort of overall governance and management of the institute, apart from its CMC process. Then use a document called the Statement of Equivalence to do a gap analysis and put corrective actions in place for areas where you can't identify some compliance. Now, we've made some changes to the way assessments will be approached now and the documents to be used, in that within the QAC, we've taken the Statement of Equivalence document and we've taken the assessor's checklist, which is the checklist they use in doing their assessment, and we've made the content of those two documents the same. So when you as an institute receive your Statement of Equivalence, you will find within it all of the questions and all of the areas that the QAC assessors are going to be looking at. So it's a very good preparation document for you in terms of being ready for the assessment, because what's in that Statement of Equivalence is exactly what the assessors are going to be looking for. So then you need to obviously study the new documents within the standards, like the new competence framework, the assessment techniques, and the code of conduct, and make sure that you carry out your CMC assessments and your institute's code are equivalent to those of ICMCI. Now, as an institute has a choice to take the ICMCI code and competence framework in their entirety, use those, or they can develop their own competence framework and code of conduct as long as they can demonstrate equivalence with the ICMCI Code of Conduct and Competence Framework. That is the principle of equivalence. And that is what the statement of equivalence actually shows. It shows how you manage your compliance or equivalence with the ICMCI standards. So having done all of that, you will receive from ICMCI these two documents, the statement of equivalence, and also a document called the basic facts, where you put in the basic data of your institute, like the name, the contact points, and also some information about the challenges you're facing and some of the best practices that you would like to put forward as part of your assessment. So those two documents need to be completed, and they're sent back to the lead assessor, and then you can agree arrangements for the on-site or virtual assessment, whichever it's going to be. And at the moment, we're still doing all our triennial assessments virtually online, but certainly during the course of next year, no doubt we'll be getting back to on-site assessments following the ICMCI policy of every third triennial assessment being an on-site, must be an on-site assessment. There are also other documents which the assessors would like to see before the assessment takes place, and you receive a list of those for you to prepare and send to the assessors in advance. It's very useful to get those documents in advance because it gives them a chance to do a read review, and then they have the opportunity to go into a lot more depth when they do the actual assessment process. So they don't have to ask, if you like, the simple basic questions, but can actually get to some of the really key points if they've had a chance to review those documents in advance. So any questions on that from anybody in terms of the process to be used? Oh, sorry, I didn't want to do that. Are you still seeing my full slide, or is that now changed?
Yes, it's on the screen, no problem.
Okay, fine. Good show. So any questions? Because of the way my screen's set up, I can't actually see the chat box or any hands raised, I'm afraid.
There's no question as I see it.
Okay, and then I'll move on. For QAC assessors and any of you who are in this webinar, obviously make sure you're familiar with the QAC reference guide and assessment process. These are two documents produced by the QAC that give the complete guidelines for assessors, how to carry out the assessment process, all the things to be looking for, and a process map of the steps to be followed during the process. Make sure that you're familiar with the updated manual, competence framework, assessment techniques, matrix, and the code of conduct. And then after the ICMCI Secretariat has made, and QAC have made their initial notification to the Institute to be ready for the assessment, the lead assessor and co-assessors are notified of that, and then it's up to the lead assessor to actually contact the Institute and remind them that the assessment will be to the new standards, and then to make the request to send all the documents for review in advance. And then the assessors prepare their assessment plan, their assessment checklist, and agree with the Institute the date for the assessment to be carried out, and also the assessment plan. So who will be talked to, which CMC candidates are going to be interviewed, and so on and so forth. And that really sort of completes my part of the presentation about what the standards are and how institutes and assessors should prepare for the assessments to take place. Any questions on that? Otherwise, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Jalal for the next part of the presentation, where he'll talk in more detail. But just to, before he does that, to talk through the key changes as an introduction, the key updates from the old version, more detail on IT skills for effective communication and administration. So the sort of personal IT things that consultants should have in terms of using word processing programs, spreadsheets, communication platforms like Zoom or GoToMeeting, and those sort of things that consultants can use to make their work more efficient. Awareness of an ability to apply latest technology for diagnostics and solutions. And here we're talking about things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all the latest technology that can be applied within a project. That's not to say that every consultant needs to be an expert in all these things, but it's having awareness of, and either the ability to use or the knowledge of where to go to get that expertise. Also, more emphasis on interpersonal skills, the ability to build relationships effectively with other people. So a lot of things to do with emotional intelligence, self-awareness, social awareness, and able to manage social behavior to build good relationships. In our code of conduct, we've built in areas about societal awareness, so application of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We talk in the competence framework more about holistic and transformational thinking, the ability for the consultant, no matter what work they're actually doing with a client, to be aware of the big picture, to be aware of the context in which their work takes place. And because we live in this VUCA world, this world of uncertainty, the ability to work with clients in a transformational way, to help them in their transformational thinking, to be agile in the way they manage their businesses. And what we've done within the competence framework is to build in more integration with the code of conduct and also with the ISO 20700 standard, the guideline for consultancy operations, which is like the process side of consultancy, how to conduct a consultancy assignment and the processes involved. And then in the code of conduct itself, we've redesigned it to give 5 areas of responsibility to the client, to society, to the organization that they work with, whether it's their own as a singleton or a partnership or a big company they work for, responsibility to colleagues in terms of support, and responsibility to the profession in maintaining the good reputation of professional consultancy. So in terms of the client, there's reference to following the 20,700 guidelines in terms of following a good consultancy process for the assignment, and also taking account of the policies that are built into the ISO 20700 standard. And in terms of society, applying the principles of the UN Societal Development Goals, the principles of ISO 26000 in terms of societal responsibility, and the principles of anti-bribery in terms of ethical behavior in winning assignments. So these are the headlines. And now I'll hand over to Jalal to talk in more detail.
Thank you very much, Nick. I now open my file and share my file with you. And I hope you can see it in full screen mode now. Just a moment. Yes. Is it in full screen mode on your side?
Yeah, it is now, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Hello again to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever applicable. We are very glad for your participation and happy to share our approaches and knowledge towards the next steps. So I will go into more details in the competence framework. This is the overall big picture of competence framework. And I would like to highlight that it has four main sections, like business insight and aptitude of the CMC candidate, and practice capabilities, consultative behavior, ethics, and professional conduct. So if we take these four main titles into consideration and focus in more detail in each of them, when we mean business insight and aptitude, we understand it is about client specialism and sectorial knowledge about the client that the CMC consultant or the consultant will provide service. But it also includes at the same time consultancy and consulting business insight on the consultant side. So overall, this is collected under the title Business Insight and Aptitude. But of course, under these titles, we have several competences described in detail in the competence framework, and I will give some examples in a couple of minutes. Then we have practice capabilities. The practice capabilities include assignment and engagement management methodologies in relation to the consultancy service, and then consultative capabilities, what are expected from the CMC as consultative capabilities. And these are also described or listed in separate competencies in the framework. And the third one includes personal capabilities and personal behavior. These are more, let's say, about the person, the consultant, under the title of consultative behavior, and also listed in the competence framework in detail. And the final one is ethics and professional conduct, which includes CMC global rate of knowledge and skills and abilities and directory and continued personal learning and development. As you know, we are not only focusing on the existing knowledge and information and capabilities of the CMC candidate, but we also expect how CMC candidate supports his learning and personal development with participation to training, workshops, congresses, and other learning platforms. And it is also considered as part of the overall, let's say, competence framework set.
And,
so yes, please.
Ask you, at
yes,
this point, we will have the common body of knowledge.
Yes, yes, exactly.
And you call it now a global breadth of knowledge.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Good
you.
point. And more details will also be accessible in the website, as Kuzaima has already highlighted. Okay. So I will go into details of the overall picture from the circular description, including continual professional development, reflection, and feedback later on. So if we continue, and the structure of the competence framework is like this. We have the key titles, and under the main 4 sections, we have business competence, technical competence, consulting skills, values and behavior competence, personal development and personal development competence. And these are divided into subtitles or sections like client business insight, consulting business, as I have mentioned, and all of these. And we also have full details of these competences on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, sorry, including, for example, understanding the client, understanding the business knowledge of the client, external awareness, etc. And the external awareness, for example, as Nick has already highlighted, may need to be aware of the ecosystem of the client, understanding the external environment of the client, because in these days we have very fast transformations, we have very fast digitalization and other drivers of change like global trends. So we expect consultants or CMC candidates to be aware of these, to understand the interaction between the client and its external world, to identify or to diagnose the existing situation before starting the consultancy service. Functional specialization, as you know, includes functional knowledge and skills, sectorial knowledge and experience. And engagement management includes client focus, assignment management, and other subjects like tools and methodologies, risk and quality management. And most of them have been already included in the previous version, of course. We have just enriched them, reinforced them, and also included some new concepts like transformational thinking, like UN SDG concepts and social responsibility and other subjects. So if you continue with the competence framework in this section of values and behavior competence, which includes ethics and professionalism, analytical skills, personal interaction, and full details on the right-hand side. And I will not repeat each of them, but just highlight some of them as examples. For example, analytical skills includes problem solving, decision making, and recommendation, and innovation, and similar subjects. Personal interaction, as also highlighted as part of emotional intelligence, as mentioned by Nick, will include taking responsibility for own actions, handling complexity, interacting effectively with others, demonstrating influencing skills, and also communication skills. And the assessment will require the CMC candidate to demonstrate these, to give examples of these during the assessment. And continued learning and development, as you see, includes self-developments in many respects to be up to date in knowledge and skills and other competency areas. So just as an example from the competence framework itself, to see its structure in more detail, just if we focus on the A1 competence, the main competence A1, client business insight, it has the titles I have mentioned already, the competences A1, 1, 2, 3, client understanding and the others, but they are explained in the next 3 columns in 3 levels. One is the foundation, the middle one is CMC level, which is the main subject of the assessment, and the third one is profession leader. Indeed, such practical aspects or approaches have been used by some of the IMCs in the past. And for example, fellow members are those who are equivalent or similar titles or definitions with the profession leader. They are the people who contribute to the profession in an exceptional way, and they are the people who have a credible, in-depth knowledge, and they lead by example, applying management and business principles, and they are the role models, in short. So we have defined these 3 columns to make a kind of, let's say, differentiation between the beginners, the CMC level, and those who are in the position of leaders. But the focus again is CMC. And in this slide, if there's no question, I just continue. In this slide, we try to identify, maybe try to emphasize ISO 27700 standard. And this is focusing on the process itself, the consultancy service process. And as you know, it has 3 main phases: contracting, execution, and closure. It describes 3 phases: contracting, execution, and closure of the project, the consultancy project. But at the same time, it also describes policies, possible policies, which may be relevant to the consultancy project. And in the ISO 27700 document, there are good examples of policies and a good list of policies, including even CSR subjects, QHSE management, risk management, data protection, IP capability, and all of these. And I will not go into full details, but as you see in the last row, the contracting details, execution details, and closure. So we also expect IMCs and CMC candidates to be aware of ISO 27700, and our approach is to think or combine the whole approach with consideration of ISO 27700 as the description of the consultancy service project, and CMC as the description of the competences of the consultant himself or herself. Back to the competence framework again as the whole structure. We have, if we look at the overall picture, and we also suggest that the IMCs and CMC candidates and even CMCs look at the framework as a whole, and it includes continued personal learning, continued professional development, and reflection and feedback. It is like a PDCA cycle or PDCA approach: plan, do's, check, and act in overall competences of the consultant. There is a figure here which may look a bit complicated, but you will see more details in the documents in the website, and we have a comparison table what has been changed in version 2014 to be included in 2021. So for example, in technical competence, when we have some competences, we explain them in client specialism and sectorial knowledge section. And if there is something in personal development competence in 2014, we have them in personal behavior, consultancy profession, and even the consultancy and consulting business insight. So there are full descriptions, full comparison tables, and other details in the documents on the website. This may also seem a bit much more complicated, sorry for that, but just trying to show you the big picture and make some comment on that. On the left-hand side, you have the key areas of competences. The key areas like engagement management, functional specialization, ethics and professionalism, etc. But the important thing here is that we have 24 competences. The key area of focus in the assessment of the CMC candidates will be this column, 24 competences. So this will be our focus, or IMC's assessment process focus, to understand, to assess the candidates. But on the other side, on the right-hand side, we have full details described in the competence framework in the cells of the table, and these are the examples of competences, and they are the good practices. The right-hand side is not a checklist. Even the 24 competences are not a checklist, but these are the key approaches and the key areas of focus. And we need to understand, by considering the 24 competences in our focus and taking the 51 good practice examples to understand and to communicate with the candidate in a more detail. So in this sense, the assessors are expected to focus on 24 competences and consider the right-hand side, the 51 examples, as good practice examples. Okay. So applying the principles of equivalence, it was already mentioned by Nick, and I will just highlight that equivalence is a concept between ICMCI rules or standards and those of the IMCs. So if IMCs define their own standards, and the equivalence concept is a key concept using for assessing compliance with the CMC standards. And ICMCI respects the historical, cultural, local, regional, and legal diversity of its members, which is definitely a richness, which is something good, and fully accepts diversity in national CMC standards and procedures in reflection of these valid differences. But at the end of the day, ICMCI shall require that any institute demonstrate to the satisfaction of ICMCI that the institute's CMC standard requires at least the equivalent level of professionalism and ethics in candidates as the ICMCI standard. This way, the reciprocity or validity of CMC labels across the ICMCIs will be clear, understandable, and practically implemented. So just a few more, one more slide indeed. Then if you have questions, we will be happy to answer. So this slide, indeed, just like the last one or two slides of Nick, and in my case, in my part, this slide will summarize the overall key messages to the IMCs and the assessors. So we expect assessors and IMCs to focus mainly on 24 competences. 51 examples of competences are good practices, and we don't expect the assessors or ICMCIs to consider them as a checklist. And again, we emphasize this is not an audit, this is an assessment. So we try to assess the candidate with this approach. Understanding the big picture, ecosystem, and stakeholders of the IMC. This is also important, maybe more important in this period than the last couple of years or before, because the world is changing very, very fast. Transformation is very fast. You may call this health conditions, working conditions because of COVID-19. You may call this digitalization. You may call this any different type of management terminology, etc. But there's a big change. This is one thing. The big change and global megatrends enforce the interaction between the client's organization and the external world, which we can call ecosystem. So the assessor, the candidates or CMCs are expected to understand this ecosystem of the client, the big picture, and interaction of the stakeholders of the client. The more they understand this big picture, the more they can make the right diagnosis, the more they can provide the right services for the right areas for improvement in the client organization. This really we would like to emphasize more, especially in the near future. And again, we will see also that not only understanding these concepts like big picture, ecosystem, and stakeholders, but also understanding the capability of the client with respect to the transformation and big changes. Respecting the principles of equivalence is also important, culture and local aspects. This also needs some flexibility, adaptability, and also understanding and respect. Considering the awareness on holistic and transformational thinking, fine, not only the ecosystem in a static way, but also in a dynamic way, including the transformational thinking and readiness for change. And we also expect the CMCs to be more proactive, even more faster than the client, to understand the next steps and to be proactive to provide solutions. And also considering, along with the transformation thinking, also considering the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are also explained in Code of Conduct. And from my case, at least I can give example, and I'm sure you are also in the same situation. Most of my clients, nearly all of the clients, are establishing new departments and developing new approaches in relation to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and sustainability initiatives. So there's a big movement in the business world on that, and the CMCs are expected to be aware of these and the linkage between the clients' functions, areas, activities, and UN SDG. And then taking integration with the Code of Conduct and ISO 27700. So you can just think of the three main dimensions: Code of Conduct from the ethics point of view, ISO 27700 from the process point of view, the consultancy project, and the competencies, the person point of view, the consultant. So these three dimensions are expected to work together. Then remembering the key dimensions of CMC competence framework, just I have mentioned the four titles, I will not repeat, from business insight and aptitude to professional conduct. And then finally, with emphasis on the new concepts such as IT skills, as it was mentioned at the beginning by Nick, awareness of and ability to apply or to become familiar with the latest technology, and interpersonal skills, and very, very importantly, emotional intelligence from the point of managing the stakeholder relations and similar aspects. So that was all, and we are ready to answer your questions. I stop sharing, and I'm looking at the chat box. There is no question or comment, but we are just looking forward to answer your questions or listen to your comments, please.
Yes, let me start.
Yes, please, Christoph.
The first question, yes. We always had the problem that the candidates cannot meet all the requirements, and many of the candidates of the German consultants say this is too difficult for me, so I will not run the CMC procedure because my clients do not ask for this, and they fear to not fulfill all the requirements. Do you see the same problem?
Indeed, as we said, we need to keep the assessment approach. Indeed, we need to focus on 24 competences and support this approach with the good practices on the most right column of the figures. 24 competences are key, but it is not used as a checklist. Try to keep the approach as assessment, please.
Yeah.
Nick, do you have something to add?
Well, yeah, just to reinforce the principle of assessment. I mean, at the end of the day, what the CMC designation means is that a consultant is capable of carrying out all aspects of a consultancy project independently and without support. That is the definition of CMC. And so what the CMC assessor should be looking at really is the big picture of when I look at what this consultant has presented me in terms of their experience and what they do and what evidence they can show. In effect, would I be, if I was a client, would I be happy to engage this consultant to do a project for me without putting my business at risk? And within that big picture, to look at those 24 competencies, or even just the 5 main headings of the competence, to say, do I think that this CMC candidate can show me sufficient awareness and experience and knowledge in those areas that they can carry out an assignment successfully. And of course, within the CMC assessment, we are looking for some evidence from clients to show that the consultant has carried out a successful assignment for them. So I think, yeah, concentrate on assessment, concentrate on the big picture, concentrate on, do I believe that this CMC candidate is able to carry out a project independently without support?
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay. This is why, indeed, this is why we emphasize understanding the ecosystem, the stakeholders, interaction between the client and the ecosystem players. So if the consultant understands these well and is aware of code of conduct, ISO 20700 and the competencies, then if he or she gives you the confidence that he will be doing this service and he will be capable of providing this service independently, then that will be okay, I think.
Yeah.
I should say, I mean, this principle applies also to the QAC assessors when they carry out their triennial assessment of institutes. It's not an audit in the sense of an ISO 9001 type audit. It is an assessment, and what they're looking at is, from what we're seeing, from what this institute tells us, are we happy that they are representing the ICMCI in terms of the way they govern themselves, the way they manage themselves, the way they carry out their CMC assessment and award process? So, you know, again, the triennial assessments are not a tick the box exercise.
Yeah,
exactly. So there should not be a question, something like asking how many questions are the minimum number of passing the CMC out of 24. This is not a valid question.
Can I just check about the time frame for our procedures to be updated and be in line with the new standards and the ICMCI assessment? We've just completed our triennial assessment now, hopefully. I think Alice will be submitting a report, I'm hoping. I'm hoping in a couple of weeks. Yeah, it would just be good to be clear on when we need to have our process now updated and aligned with the new standards.
From QAC point of view, will you answer this question, Nick?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, Christy, yeah, I'm expecting the report from your institute's assessment anytime now. I'm looking forward to it. And of course, your next assessment now will obviously be in 3 years' time. So I think, fortunately for you, you'll have plenty of time to make the adjustments. But obviously, I mean, what we are looking for is, since the new standards become fully in force from October, then obviously we would expect to be seeing any CMC candidates from October onwards being assessed against the new competence framework, and we would expect the Institute to be putting together a code of conduct which is equivalent to the ICMCI, or adopting the ICMCI policy in full. So really, we're looking from October for all these new standards to actually be put in place, irrespective of when your next assessment is going to be.
Thank you. That's good. Yeah, good clarification. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments or clarifications? As it was already mentioned, this presentation, the recording, and will be shared by the Secretariat with all of the participants after we finish the 4th session later today. Okay.
And I like to thank you for the effort to update all the papers and the information and so on. And I know this is an honorary work, and thank you very much to Nick and you.
Thank you, Christoph.
Well, thanks,
thank you very much.
Thank you, Christoph. Yeah, I mean, certainly the work that PSC has done in the updating the documents really brings us right up to date,
yeah.
As a professional organisation. And within the QAC, I have to say that, you know, we have recognised some of the issues that have been prevalent in assessments up until now. And we're working very hard to change our documentation, to change our processes, to make life much easier for IMCs in the assessment process, to make it much quicker, and to reduce the burden on our assessors, who are volunteers and put in a lot of time. So, you know, we're trying to do everything to make all of our processes much more efficient, less painful, because I know sometimes they, well, like every assessment can be a painful experience, but we want to make everything easier, more efficient, so that we can concentrate on the important things in terms of, you know, how institutes are getting on in supporting ICMCI in promoting professional consultancy within their own country. So, yeah, hopefully we'll see the fruits of all that work over the forthcoming years.
So just, I would like to make a little correction. Although I mentioned that these will be shared with you after the 4th session later today, I meant we will do the 4th session later today, but the sharing may take a bit more time to work on the recording of the sessions and sending them to you. So just be patient to receive them in a couple of days, let's say, not today.
Very good.
Thank you very much for your activities. I hope we'll put on the ground surely in October or before. Next session here in Italy is September, late September. So it's too early for applying now, but October is not so far. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think it's time for us to thank everybody for your participation in the session. Just to remind you, this is not the end of the process. Certainly, we are available, because I know questions will arise. When you switch off this presentation, you'll immediately think of something you want to ask. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us.
And we have to do our homework.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, but thanks everybody for your participation, and well, yeah, looking forward to seeing how things go from October onwards.
Okay, goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes,
Thank you.
enjoy
Bye.
the rest of your day.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.